Before that, I always thought, oh, I could never travel solo. And by now I'm like, I could never travel not solo anymore. You have the total freedom to do whatever you want. And as soon as you learn, or as soon as you can kind of let go of that anxiousness or shyness or fear, as soon as you can let this go, it just becomes a very enriching, fulfilling experience. At least that's how it went for me.
That is today's guest, Maria Glaser, who's been on an incredible journey traveling solo in a campervan across 16 countries. But she didn't start out as this fearless solo traveler. She built her confidence step by step over time, and it has now turned into this incredible life-changing adventure she is on through Europe and beyond in her campervan, which includes traveling through several of the stands like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which we'll hear about today. You'll also discover how starting small can lead to big adventures, practical strategies for campervanning across different countries, including which European and Central Asian countries are campervan friendly and which to perhaps approach with a bit of caution. You'll gain a better understanding around your ability to connect with others while traveling solo, the financial realities of this style of travel, off the beaten path, destination recommendations, and loads more happening right now. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you for being here, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And you're going to hear an incredible story today from Maria, our guest, who ended up actually adopting a dog in Armenia on this trip. I'm bringing that up because it's just an example of the hidden adventures, let's say, that are kind of lurking around the corners of your big adventure. You know, you don't know what's going to happen, where your life's going to go when you get out there on the road, who you're going to meet. One of the most exciting parts about travel, and I think just something to think about as we dive in as you're planning your own journeys. Sometimes it can be scary for different reasons to travel. Maybe it's financially, spending all the money and investing in the money to travel. Maybe it's the actual travel itself. Maybe it's your first solo trip or, first time to a new country or whatever. I think these travel anxieties and these travel fears can be pretty common amongst travelers. And I like to point that out just because it normalizes our feelings, right? We have to remember we all feel this way at certain points. But if we can focus on some of those hidden gems we might find, yes, in terms of destinations, but also in life, right? The things that are hidden that are going to be revealed to us, whether internally through our own processing, our own reflection that happens before, during, or after our trip, or, maybe literally life-changing things like, in this case, bringing a dog into your life or something like that. You just never know where travel is going to lead you. And as we all tend to get caught up in fear as humans, sometimes it's just a great reminder to think about the incredible things that await, even though you don't know what they are. So anyway, with that being said, please enjoy my conversation with Maria. Stick around on the back end if you'd like. I'll leave you with a quote and one of my favorite takeaways from this episode, a bit of a challenge, if you will, to leave you with today. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the other side. Cheers. Maria Glaser, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You have quite a journey to share in your camper van. You have a little travel companion now. I think we have a lot to unpack in terms of like destinations and camper van life, specifically through some of the 16 countries you've traveled through, like some of the stands we're going to talk about, and other places where you don't hear the campervan stories as much, I feel, which is like a big reason why I wanted to have you on. But before all that, it's always fun to hear kind of the genesis of the travels in the first place. And I know you're doing this solo as well. And I wanted to ask you about solo travel and why you were solo traveling specifically. So yeah, if you could just share a little bit about like when you bought the camper van, what was the sort of intention and why did you direct your travels in that direction, let's say?
All right. So I have bought this van a couple of years back, long before I started this trip. And it was kind of a COVID project because I had originally planned to go to the States with a friend of mine. Had a little travel budget for that. And then COVID came and obviously flying abroad was kind of getting more tricky. And I had always wanted to get a van eventually at some point. It was kind of my mom's dream as well. But she never got around to do it. Yes. She grew up in Eastern Germany, and lived there for the better part of her life. So it wasn't really possible for her to get a car or to travel elsewhere than Hungary, I guess. Anyways, so it was her dream as well. And then I had this money and I kind of had the time and just started looking into vehicles. And then I just ended up buying a car, which felt insane at the time. I was 21. And it was just before my birthday. And I was like, well, it seems to be my birthday present for myself now. Yeah. And that's when I started converting. It was like an old construction car, so it was entirely empty. Yeah. And that's how it started.
Okay. And by started, you mean, did you take that first vehicle and start like traveling around Germany and camping and going different places? Or did it literally start then where you were gearing up to take this big trip you're on now?
Not yet. I didn't even consider at the time, to be honest. So I converted for a couple of months for the first time and then went to Southwest Europe. So I traveled like France, Spain, went to Italy for a couple of weeks in summer. I was still studying as well during that time. And after that, the summer after that, I went to the Balkans on a 6-week trip. And after that, I kind of realized, okay, I might want to go further. Yeah, kind of built the courage to actually do it. And then reconverted the car because a lot of things had to be improved to actually live in it. And then the year after, 1.5 years after I left, I think, after the Balkans trip.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually great travel advice as we're just getting right into this because you mentioned building the confidence to do it. And I think that's like you didn't start off just, taking off into this solo 16 country journey. People can do that, but that's not necessarily for everybody. You kind of like built up to it, right? Like figure out the lifestyle, figure out where to sleep, what's safe, like what you like about having in a vehicle and not having through taking these small trips. I mean, I think that's so smart. I mean, I don't know if that was like, intentional. You're like, let me just test this out and see, and then I'm going to go bigger, or if it just kind of organically evolved. But it seems like that was a good way that like kind of matched your personality and comfort level. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. It did build organically. And even on this trip, it kind of built up. Like when I started the trip, I'm trying not to go too far ahead, but I set myself the goal to get to Mongolia by land. And even in the first few like weeks and months, and it's been my first solo trip, like proper solo trips, I actually had to figure out how to travel all by myself. So even on this journey, my confidence kind of built up and my experiences, of course, they did. I could not have started driving in the stands, for example. It had to kind of build up. I had to kind of understand how the countries work step by step to be able to like finally understand how things work around here. Don't know if that makes sense, but.
Well, I think it's inspiring. And I just like, not to belabor this point, but I think that, for anybody listening that's having like, no matter how big a travel dream is, like you want to drive to Mongolia in your case, or whatever the case is, it does feel like this comes up a lot in the show where like, if you just kind of get started and let things sort of organically evolve and you get the ball rolling, get confidence, it almost like even a seemingly innocent like weekend trip may be the thing you need that leads you to having the confidence to like take the next step, which eventually snowballs into the big, let's say the big dream. But like, that doesn't mean you discount all the other experiences before that, right? It just kind of leads up to it. But meanwhile, you're like, hey, this is a win-win, double bonus. Like you're also having incredible travels, like as you're building up to it. So I think it's really, really cool and inspiring. I have to ask you about your mom because her story serves as a good reminder of how lucky we are that we just get to travel in the first place. A lot of us listening to the show that we have, a passport that can allow us to do it, or we live in a place where, there's not like some oppressive regime that's holding you back from traveling. For you, this dream and this path, was it your mom talking about this growing up that like planted the seed for you?
Amongst others. She didn't talk too much about it, to be fair, and I had a lot of outside influence as well. But yeah, partly.
Yeah. Well, how does she feel about you doing this and seeing you? Have you been able to like take her along on any of these trips, or how has that been for you two?
It's actually funny. That might be one of the most frequently asked questions to me. Like, how's your mom seeing you travel like this? She is obviously worried. Both of my parents are, or I guess my family in general, but she is pretty, I'd say she's probably pretty proud. And she visited me a couple of times. She's been to Turkey twice, came to Yerevan. She's even going to visit me here in Kazakhstan probably by the end of the year. So yeah, we actually got to travel a lot together, and it's nice to kind of show her the world that I experience, because she's lacking the courage so far to travel all alone. And I am kind of opening a few doors to her, I think. Also, like, before this trip, I've lived abroad a couple of times, and she was always visiting me, like trying to figure out how the places work that I've been to and trying to understand my experiences. And it's pretty nice.
It gets interesting in life when that switch goes from, you're a child and your parents are sort of like showing you the world and teaching you everything. And then you get to a point where you carve a path that might inspire them or push them out of their comfort zone. And now you're the one kind of leading the way. And that's always an interesting dynamic shift,
Yeah, totally.
What has that done for your relationship with your parents?
I mean, obviously sharing memories with anyone kind of strengthens the relation you have. And it's probably the same with her. Like, we had one pretty intense shared experience when she was visiting me in Turkey, because we got attacked by 2 shepherd dogs, these like big Kangals. And my mom got bitten in that accident. And that was quite insane. Like, these dogs are huge. They're usually made to protect the shepherds against wolves. So they're like, that's definitely not fun. And apparently there are quite a few fatal incidents every year in Turkey with them, because they keep them to protect the shepherds and the herd. But at the same time, they don't really train them well most of the time. So they just roam free. They don't listen to recalls or whatever. And then they get really, really aggressive, because that's what the breed is made for. And yeah, she got bitten. I never thought that a dog bite could actually look like this. It was ridiculous. Like, her whole, like, it was on her upper thigh. And like her whole, like half of her leg was just swollen and turned black within a day. It was ridiculous. So yeah, and that's when we went to the hospital, of course. They kind of cleaned it, or well, at least they tried. The hospital wasn't the best. She got rabies vaccinations, and then for like a week we had to check into the hospital every couple of days for like rabies shots. And that was crazy for both of us. We both had like nightmares for weeks following. But yeah, it was kind of still interesting to, maybe not interesting, but a bonding experience for sure, going through this whole process together. And especially abroad in like Turkey.
Yeah, I mean, those kind of incidents, they'll certainly bring you together because you're united in that sort of shared experience, but also it can definitely, like, when you take off that things can happen, that's kind of part of the point, right? You're like putting yourself out there in a way. And I mean, if you listen to the show, we all know, it's generally good people out there and whatever, but like anything can happen. And something like this is a perfect example of course, anything can happen anywhere, and, in your hometown too. These are the kind of things that like can put you off from like furthering the adventure. It sounds like, I mean, your mom's still willing to come visit, and you're still out there on the road. So it sounds like you figured out kind of how to overcome the nightmares and the adversity. I'm sure it sticks with you, but yeah. Can you talk about that? Like, were there any issues with that? Like thinking about, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, or?
Well, it did certainly change my behavior. So I believe the reason why we got attacked in the first place is because we were with my dog. And that probably triggered these shepherd dogs even more. So before the incident, I used to just, even by myself, just like stop in random places with a car, go for walks. But these random places are usually where you have encounters with like animal groups and shepherd dogs in particular. And I even had different like encounters before. And this one just like showed me how bad it can get. Like if I would have been by myself that day, that could have turned out pretty badly for either me or the dog or both of us. So I kind of stopped doing that. And I just, as soon as I see other dogs, I just turn around, even stray dogs, I just turn around, go away, which is something we even did that day, actually. But yeah, I just got super cautious about that. And generally, that fear, there were, at least for a couple of weeks after that, I had an increased fear level for sure. Like I was much more nervous traveling solo, and I didn't consider to just stop traveling, but yeah, it did stick with me for a while. Still does.
Yeah, sorry to hear that happen. I'm glad. Sounds like your mom's is okay. Her leg got better and everything.
Yeah, so, yeah. By now she is. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna ask you about your dog because that's sure a fun story, yeah. And you've got a dog with you, which changes the whole travel experience too. I do want to dig in a little bit more to the first journeys you took in Southwest Europe, you mentioned, and then to the Balkans afterwards, which you could especially say like Southwest Europe, probably a more common place for travelers to go than where you are now, especially with the vans and stuff like that. Maybe, I would say yes, at least at this point.
Definitely.
You're not seeing like a bunch of, hashtag van lifers around everywhere. I don't think Kazakhstan, but maybe it's growing. I don't know. You can tell me.
Definitely a different type of van lifers. Like you have all these 4x4 kind of crazy overlanding people around here. And I would say in Europe, you have a lot of just like weekend travelers or, that kind of traveler, I guess.
Well, let's just hone in on that area specifically, like Southwest Europe and that trip, because, you said you learned a lot leading up to this bigger trip through those other trips. And, these are places where, I always think like, this would be a really cool thing to do around Europe. And then I also think about like how small some of the roads are and the villages and, old medieval towns and things like that. And yeah, I would just love to hear, like, for somebody listening, they're like, you know what, like maybe they don't want to drive to Mongolia in a camper van, but maybe they're interested in just like having a vehicle-based like travel experience through Europe. And they might have some concerns about, oh, where am I going to park? Some of these things and crowds and things like that. Yeah, I just want to hear your best advice around that, like that style of trip around Europe, and like what the experience was like. Let's unpack that a bit.
I mean, I haven't been to Europe in almost 1.5 years now. And I feel like the whole camper life, van life thing has changed significantly within that time frame. So I'm not sure what I would say about Europe now is, well, I just talked about this recently with my dad, actually, because he is kind of even starting to get into the van life too now. Just rented like a camper with his wife, and they've been touring around Slovenia for a bit. But he basically said that he has the feeling that you can't park anywhere anymore in Europe because everything is restricted, and people living there will be very hostile against people living in their vans. So he said it's apparently pretty difficult. And then if you always need to pay for parking, then obviously what's the point of even traveling with a van? Then you might as well stay in a guest house or something. So that's what he said about this. But back in the days when I was traveling Europe with my, yeah, that's my inner grandma talking. So yeah, back in the days when I was traveling Europe with a van, it was still pretty doable, I would say. I mean, I would usually avoid, as you say, like cities with these like small roads, small streets, like no parking space. I remember especially in like France and Spain and Italy, it was like going into the cities was crazy sometimes. And I have a small van, and I'm by now pretty good at parking. But as soon as you have like a bigger van or a higher van, then you might really struggle to get through. So I would probably recommend at least like parking on the outskirts or something. And then, yeah, regarding Europe, I mean, there are a few countries I wouldn't travel to anymore with a van. For example, I was in Croatia on this Balkans trip, and Croatia just really annoyed me because it's like you either get fined because the police is like super strict on fining you if you just park somewhere, especially along the coastline, which is the thing in Croatia. And if you want to avoid getting the fine, you can stay on like private properties, and they do have those a lot, but they're super expensive because they know that the fine is going to be more expensive. So you'd rather stay there. And then it's just been so crowded, so many tourists there. I really didn't enjoy my time. And you feel like every step you do, you just really feel like a tourist traveling there. And that's what I generally don't like, which is why I am in Kazakhstan now, where things are less touristy for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So
Yeah.
you would say like, yeah, Croatia would be an example of a country to avoid. No offense to the Croatians or what they have to offer.
No,
You're
definitely.
specifically speaking to like the van life experience, we'll call it, which I think, these two things bring up, this is an interesting juxtaposition because you mentioned, staying on the outside of some of the cities and stuff like that in Europe, which I think there's like beauty in that limitation because it's going to take you to places that you wouldn't go. Like if you were just backpacking or whatever, you would just probably just go into the city instead of to the outskirts. And now you're like seeing people and things that you wouldn't been in that location. And in that way, like the mode of transportation, the choice of the mode of transportation is defining some of the destinations and the experience just for logistical purposes, and then the flip side of that coin though, is like what you described in Croatia, where it's like that limitation might not be such a good thing because you're getting fined and then you're forced to, and now it sounds like it would be easier to explore Croatia and get under the skin of it if you didn't have the van in some ways and that sort of parking issues and stuff like that. I mean, again, we're generalizing, but I'm just bringing this up because these are all considerations when people are making plans and they're trying to like cherry pick what kind of travel experiences they want to have in different places. So that's interesting for me to hear as somebody who lives in Europe, who has definitely thought about like just one day going and buying a van and just like, just in your experience, again, Balkan, Southwest Europe, but what was like the most sort of van life friendly place where you were like, this is awesome. This is like the way to do this place.
Hold on. I think I need to make a choice here.
Well, you're allowed to give us more than one. I mean,
okay.
We won't hold you to just one.
I think I would say, especially in the eastern part, I would say Romania and Greece. Maybe because they were my favorites anyway. So like, I really enjoyed traveling there. But Romania was brilliant. It's been one of the most special countries on my trip this time, actually. And then I've only been to the northern part of Greece, but I just love Greek people. Like they're really adorable. They're friendly and they're camper friendly. At least they were when I was there last. So yeah, and you can just, even at the beach, you can just stay anywhere, sleep anywhere. And it's been pretty chill.
A little more lax with the the rules and everything.
Yeah. And then actually beyond that, if I can add that too.
No, go ahead.
Then beyond Europe, I would definitely recommend Turkey. Turkey is, because they have a huge community of campers as well. There are even people like full-time living in the van all year round, just like from Turkey, traveling Turkey all the time. And that one's they have a crazy community. Like for the first week, I think every day I stopped somewhere, I got like biscuits, I got nuts, I got some kind of food from the van, like the person in the van next to me. Which is, it's just adorable. I love this and you can literally park anywhere and no one will be bothered. If anything, they'll bring you food.
Yeah, let's talk about that part of the van. Like, because you're in the van, you're sleeping in the van, you park next to other people. Like you said, you're kind of like, there's this community aspect to it, or everybody kind of recognizes, you might not even be able to speak the same language, or I'm sure you just see each other on the road, or you might just like give a nod because you're like, yeah, I know, like we're kind of like in doing this thing together. We know like what this is about, where you're one of me, you're one of, we're like-minded in a way, it's like it unites you in some ways. And so like for you, like has the community around that been an important part of your travels, or is it more of like a side benefit?
I would say it's a side benefit because it happens rarely that I meet people my age traveling in vans. To start with.
You want to share how old you are?
I do get along with me. I'm 25. And in my experience, it's usually like older couples traveling in vans, like maybe like 40, 50, even 50, 60 plus, like people retiring and then moving into the van. I do get along with them, but that's not it usually doesn't turn into a friendship, to say it that way. So I would say it's a side benefit, but I'm always happy for a chat with someone living in the van. It's always useful, always nice.
Well, this comes back a little bit to the solo travel experience. Well, all right, couple questions. Give us some context here on this trip. Like, I know you want to drive to Mongolia, and you started in Germany, I'm guessing?
I did, yes.
Okay. Is this like a indefinite trip where you're like, I have no end date, or is this a trip where you're like, I'm gone for this amount of time and I'm going back to Germany? How far have you gone? And you mentioned through 16 countries, just to give us some context on this journey you're on now.
All right. So I used to have an end date, or at least I used to plan with 1.5 years in total. So I originally wanted to be back, or at least on my way back by now from Mongolia. Little spoiler, I didn't even get there yet, so it's not sticking to that. But by now, so my plan for now is I'm in Kazakhstan now. Drove more than 20,000 kilometers across 16 countries. Did it all by land, and by next year, probably in spring, as soon as the weather is good enough and warm enough, I want to get into Mongolia, crossing either Russia again or China. And then I will probably spend the summer there for as long as I can, visa-wise, and then head back by this time next year and go back to Germany. Though I am not entirely sure yet if I'm actually going back or if I continue traveling from Mongolia. So that's yet to be decided.
Okay. What an adventure. So this has all been solo. Well, now you have your dog with you. I guess you want to share how did you end up adopting a dog, and why? Was it part of like the solo travel thing to just have companionship, or yeah?
That really wasn't planned. And I remember people saying like, usually solo female travelers always travel with a dog. And I used to think like, why? And then I adopted my dog in the beginning of this year, found him on the 2nd of January on a road in Armenia. And there were a couple of things leading up to this decision, because especially in the Caucasus area and like Georgia, Armenia, even the eastern part of Turkey, you have plenty of stray dogs. And I adore dogs. I always have. And it always broke my heart to see them and like cuddle them, buddy up with them, and then see them leave, knowing that they'll probably die within like at least a couple of years because they get run over by a car or starve or freeze or whatever. Yeah, and I did consider adopting a dog a couple of times, but I never felt like I was actually ready for it. So yeah, I was, and then at that time when I found my dog, I was on the road for 7 months. I kind of figured out my stuff, I knew my routines. I knew how the traveling goes. I kind of knew how I work when I travel solo. And then I started to feel like I was actually ready to take the responsibility for another living being. And that was like a shift that I felt around like Christmas, New Year's. And yeah, and then I ran into that dog. And as I said, it really wasn't planned, but we kind of clicked, which it kind of sounds a bit weird, but that doesn't happen too often. Like, I just saw that dog and I was like, oh, you seem really nice. And from my side, that happens more frequently. But then I also got the feeling from him that he didn't just stick with me for the bread that I gave him, which he did love though. So yeah, I fed him a little bit and then I was like waiting. I was waiting for like 15, 20 minutes to see if he would run off. Sometimes they do have a place to live after all. They have like a gang of dogs that they stick with. And in those cases, I wouldn't want to adopt a dog because it kind of like, it might leave another group of dogs behind. So yeah, but he really wouldn't leave. And for days after, I didn't have a harness. I didn't have a leash for him. Because there weren't any pet shops around in the area I was traveling. So he was always like off leash, just like walking with me. And he was, super attached very, very early on. And that's when I realized that he's a very gentle soul. I watched him very closely for a while because, I was still keeping the option to give him to a shelter eventually if it wouldn't have worked out. But he's a very gentle soul. Like, yeah, he just wants to cuddle everything he finds. It's insane. So, yeah.
That's a sweet story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
You guys found each other.
We did. It really did feel like this.
What's your dog's name? I'm sorry.
Vidi. All good.
Vidi. Yeah, the fact that Vidi was following you around and staying with you despite being off leash and having total freedom to just go somewhere else and sticking around. It's like, all right, yeah, there's something here. That's cool. Talk about the solo travel experience. I mean, you have companionship now in the form of Vidi, but I would love to ask about this especially, being a solo female traveler, because it's certainly something I can't speak to. I guess, what were your ideas of what that might be like before embarking on the journey, and what's sort of, did that match up with like sort of some of the reality, or like, how is it? Yeah. Just how has it been?
I didn't really want this to be a solo trip in the beginning. I was really, until I left, trying to find someone who might join me or that I could bear for that long a time. But it just didn't happen. So, and I didn't want to be held back by that. So the curiosity just took over, and that's why I started solo. And in the first time, I had so many visitors from home, like friends, family, that for the first couple of months, I wasn't even alone. But I was always like with someone. And that eventually, even though it was a very nice time and I had a lot of good moments, but eventually it did stress me out a lot, because if you live in that smaller space with someone all the time, you just kind of need your time and your space at some point. That was one of my early on learnings. And then I was actually really looking forward to solo traveling, like really solo. And then it was the best thing ever. Before that, I always thought, I could never travel solo. And by now I'm like, I could never travel not solo anymore. You have the total freedom to do whatever you want. And as soon as you learn or as soon as you can kind of let go of that kind of anxiousness or shyness or fear, as soon as you can let this go, it just becomes a very enriching, fulfilling experience. At least that's how it went for me. And I'm pretty glad that it turned out that way. Yeah.
Beautiful. I've talked to a lot of solo travelers that have, through sort of whatever reason, became like accidental solo travelers in a way. I've talked to people that have sort of intentionally gone on the solo thing. I can't think of one person that has like had a bad thing to say about solo travel. And I know we talk about this topic a lot on the show, but I do think it's important because, like, at least for me, and I'm not sure how you feel, but the solo travel thing, probably the biggest thing it's done, one of the biggest things it's done for me is just completely opening up the world, because after experiencing it and like getting into the joys of it and like, even like the struggles which lead to growth and other positive things, I found the whole experience totally positive. Because when I started solo traveling, it was kind of the same. I thought I was going with a friend, and then it happenstance, it turned out different. But I'm so glad it did, because it felt like after you realize how it is nice to spend time with yourself and out in the world on your own, and then you never feel like restricted, like, oh, I have to wait to take this trip because somebody's got to come with me, or like you just feel like you could do anything because that it's going to be enjoyable because you could just go.
Yeah, totally.
It's a lovely thing.
Yeah.
And
you kind of, for me, I also built along the way, I built the confidence in my maybe social abilities. I don't know, because even though I'm traveling solo, I'm barely alone if I don't want to be, because you get to meet people everywhere. And as soon as you figure that out, going solo isn't even that scary anymore. As soon as you kind of know how to get in touch with people, and how to socialize. There are so many ways to do that. I guess that's well,
I mean, do you want to share some tips, like a two or three your best?
Yeah, of course. I mean, besides the van camping community, I use couch surfing a lot, even if it's not for actually staying at someone's place, which is what it's intended for primarily. But they also have an hangout option, which works really well in big cities. So you can just hang out with other travelers or even locals using the app. That's pretty cool. And then, and whenever I feel like I really need to get to know people, I sometimes just stay in hostels, or with a van, you can even sleep in the van, but sometimes use like the facilities of the hostel. And if it's a big one with a kitchen, then of course, while cooking, you'll just get to know everyone around. So I use those mostly while traveling with a van.
Yeah. What else has it taught you about yourself? Spending this much time with yourself.
Plenty. It showed me, well, maybe two of the biggest things. It showed me what I'm scared of, what scares me and why it scares me. There are a lot of things to this. And it kind of made me, I built the ability to cope with these fears, which is also something I've learned. And I built the confidence in myself, or I realized that there are so many situations that I can actually deal with. And they sound horrible, like this one with my mom. Like when I talk about this, it sounds so awful to me, but then knowing that we kind of managed to get out of this situation as well as we could at the time. It's a good feeling to know that there's hell a lot of stuff in this world that I can actually deal with, even though it sounds really scary thinking about it.
Kind of like having confidence in your resourcefulness, your ability to be resourceful in the moment. What are some of those fears? Can you share? Are you willing to share? You mentioned.
Actually, I used to think for a long time that I was scared of being alone, which is ironic, being a solo traveler. And for example, I've kind of tried to dive into this feeling and realized that it's not actually fear of being alone, but that it's rather fear of being left out, or being left in general, which is, I guess, perfectly natural. But I just kind of went to, amongst others, I went to the bottom of this one, or tried to. I think that's one of the bigger ones.
Yeah. What a beautiful gift to have the time and the space and the inclination to try to go to the bottom of some of your deepest fears. I mean, that's incredible. What does that look like for you, going to the bottom of a fear? Is that like writing, thinking, just like how you, I'm just curious.
It comes and goes in waves. At the moment, or for the past few weeks and months, I haven't really had any access to my emotions because I was traveling a lot. I was driving a lot. And during those times, my body seems to have this mechanism of shutting down. It's pretty interesting, actually, because I just was in a very constant state of neutral emotions. I didn't get like emotional ups. I didn't get emotional downs. And I think that this is probably because my body knows that I need to function when I really travel, like when I go to new countries. And then traveling Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in summer was super challenging for me because of the heat mainly, and also because you need to drive a lot. I had a couple of issues with the car, not too big, but still it was pretty challenging. And yeah, during those times, I feel like my body's just shutting down. And as I said, I don't get access to my emotions. So I don't actually reflect too much during those times. It's more like taking in what I see and what I experience. But I spent a lot of time in Georgia last year. And during that time, I had a lot of time to reflect because I was I spent a lot of time in the same places. I went to a yoga retreat for a week, decided to take that week off, to just switch off. Like I switched off my phone, switched off my laptop, just took a whole week of digital detox. I was writing a lot during that time, trying to process what had happened while traveling up until that point. So I always need those times of silence in between where I can actually, just get back to myself. And then I started meditating last year, though I'm not too strict with it, but yeah, that's usually what I do.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I could understand like the sort of the travel days, and it's interesting to think about like kind of taking it in and then processing later. But there's also an element of, well, not always, but I think there can be an element too when you're traveling through a foreign country and it's all new. You're taking so much in, like you said, there might not be time to reflect in some ways, or you're acting more as a sponge. And then also, you can be on sort of like you're on it, like you're sort of alert. You're kind of like very aware. You're trying to like make sure that things are cool and like everybody around you is like doesn't have any bad intention. All this sort of like the typical travel stuff. You kind of have to be a bit aware. You can't necessarily always be just super relaxed and open. Sometimes you're just like making sure things are good around you and you're safe, that kind of stuff. So there can be an element of that too. I get that. Well, I mean, this trip across the stands in a van and some of the other places you mentioned, Georgia and stuff like that, what have been some of the highlights? Like, what are some places where you've been where, you would tell some listeners like, these, like, I'm sure this mode of travel takes you to some unique places with perhaps not as many tourists, or maybe those tourists are also fellow sort of overlanders. So it's a lot less people in some ways because there's not as many people traveling in that way, as there are in some other ways. Yeah. I mean, you've been through, you want to share Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, you mentioned Russia, some of these Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Some of them I don't even know how to freaking pronounce.
Let alone write. Like the English writing of the stans is ridiculous. Kyrgyzstan has like 2 Y's, a Z, and then like stan in the end. It's insane. Yeah, I have to look it up every time I write it. So,
yeah, what's the travel experience like? I mean, give us a peek. What's going on the ground?
All right. All right. I'll focus a little more on the stands in a minute. However, regarding like my highlights, I already mentioned Romania, which I loved, and Turkey for traveling with a camper. And Turkey's also, because it's so big and so diverse, it's my absolute recommendation for European travelers. Because it's so close also, like you can pretty quickly get there. And the people are lovely. So Turkey's high up on my list. And then because everyone's hyping Georgia. I don't know if this is just within my social bubble or if you have the same experience, but I feel like everyone's like, oh, I'm going to Georgia. And like, it seems to be such a big thing. And I just want to say that Armenia is super underrated. I spend a lot of time in Armenia too. No one goes there except if they need a Russian visa because it's easier. But Armenia is super cool for travelers, especially people who want to be off the beaten path a little bit. Okay, and in the stands, there were honestly so many amazing places. One of my all-time highlights was Mangistau in Kazakhstan. It's in the southwest, and it's a super crazy desert with like rock formations that I've never seen in all my life. It's honestly took my breath away a couple of times, and that's unfortunately something that barely happens to me by now, but that was insane. I really loved that. And Uzbekistan had this amazing architecture, this like, it's kind of from the Silk Road times, and very colorful patterns and murals like all along the walls. So that really impressed me as well. Even though I was in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan in July and August, and I wouldn't quite recommend that. Like it goes up to like 40, 45 degrees. And especially if you drive, I don't have an AC. It wasn't fun. And especially with the doggo, like we were always driving either really early or really late to avoid the heat. But even at night, it wouldn't cool down. In Uzbekistan, I think I haven't slept a single night in the van. I was always staying in air-conditioned places. Well, and then afterwards, I went to Tajikistan and drove along Pamir Highway to Kyrgyzstan, which is a whole nother chapter, but also was a very nice route. But to be fair, after Uzbekistan, I was already feeling a little travel burned out. So by the time I got into Kyrgyzstan, I was just rushing through the country for now. I want to get back next year and take more time. But yeah, I was a little too stressed out at the time.
Cool. Thanks for painting some of the picture for us there. Budget-wise, what do you think has been roughly how much you've spent per day? I'm just curious. It's always, people are always curious how much does this style of travel cost? And I mean, it sounds like, in some places, like you said, with the heat and things, like you might have a day where you're like sort of like the more expensive versions of your day where you're maybe staying in a hotel and maybe get a meal out and things like that versus like the sort of you're eating from the grocery store and sleeping in the van somewhere free, like what's the sort of, I would imagine that's like the two sort of ends of the budget spectrum, that sort of from the lifestyle perspective. Would that be correct? Maybe there's the occasional like 3 or 4 star hotel in there if you want to spoil yourself, but
to be fair, that's, I haven't even been to, I don't go to hotels. If anything, I spoil myself with like a dormitory or something. That's my level of spoiling. No, so I can't really say anything about that, but generally, the stands are pretty cheap, I would say, for most like Western people from Europe, from the States, unless if you get into the bigger cities. I spent some time in Tashkent. That was already expensive-ish. I was actually staying in a hotel there. And then now I'm living in Almaty, and it's also like, around here, it's also crazy expensive for my understanding of prices by now. Yeah, but generally I can't really say how much I spend on a day. I know how much I spend for fuel, which is also like in Kazakhstan and Russia, it's super cheap.
But I guess just
Sometimes
roughly,
along-
what do you think you're...
But I know in a month I roughly spend maybe like 500 to 800 euros.
Okay. And that's like if you don't have a big
Yeah.
car repair or something. I don't know if you've run across
exactly.
any
That would be
big car.
fuel. Yeah, fuel, food, dog food, accommodation every now and then. Yeah, eating out every now and then. So.
And are you working along the way? Isn't that?
I am.
Yeah, okay, because this is like a whole other element we haven't talked about, because these aren't the typical places where you think about the working, traveling thing, you know? What are you doing? Is it like client work? How have you managed the work travel part of it? How's that been? And I guess, it would probably help to know what it is you do and how much responsibility. Is it like a 40 hours a week? Are you sort of like your own boss and you're freelancing? Give us a picture of kind of what the work travel side of it looks like.
Yeah, so it's been going pretty well. I have a couple of clients mainly based in Germany that I work for. I am a freelance copy editor, writer, translator. So everything related to text, mainly German or translation German-English. But yeah, I've been freelancing for as long as I've traveled on this trip. And right now a couple of weeks ago, I started an internship here in Almaty, and I work as a journalist for a German-speaking newspaper, which is pretty cool.
Oh, cool.
I really enjoy
Awesome.
that position. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really good fun. So I've been doing that along the way. However, it doesn't fully cover my expenses. I had an amount of savings in the beginning that is slowly but surely vanishing. So every month I kind of worked maybe 5 to 10 hours a week, and then took a little money off my savings. And then what I also like to do along the way is workaways. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept.
Yeah. Workaway.info is the big one that I know of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you basically, exactly. So you basically work in a place where you get food and accommodation for free. And I did that 3 times along the way so far. Might do another one in Kazakhstan by next year. So yeah, that's always good to, because as soon as I do this, I don't have to spend money for accommodation anymore, especially now in winter. And at the same time, by doing my freelance work, I can add up some, or I can get some money.
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing a really cool mix of different things, which of course, when you're on the road this long, definitely I'm sure keeps it fresh. A couple more questions I want to ask you about. You had a post on social media a little over a year ago, and in it you said, my life rhythm changed completely and there are new adventures coming up almost every day. I even adopted a dog. So this was like, back then at that point you had been through, I think, 14 countries. I'm just wondering, what your thoughts are on your home culture now that you've been gone for a while, and you mentioned that the life rhythm changing. What you mean by that, and like how has it changed your perspective of your home country, if at all?
My life rhythm changed because I used to study after school at university, which was my main thing, and I was working on the side. But I generally had an occupation for most of my time, like kind of something stable. And I mean, now, even with those couple of hours of work every week, I start my days whenever, I eat whenever, I drive whenever, it's entirely unplanned, entirely free most of the time. So that's basically what that means. And most of my friends by now have graduated and they're working their 9-to-5s, which still is kind of typical in Germany. I mean, some people are trying to work less, have some more free time, do sabbaticals or try to travel, but usually it's this 9-to-5 culture. Well, that always seemed strange to me, to be fair, not just while traveling, even before. I always kind of thought that this is maybe not for me, or at least not what I would want right now, and not what I would want with a job that I don't enjoy. I do enjoy working, and I could imagine doing like my 40 hours a week, but then this would need to be something that I really, really enjoy and support what I would want to do. And regarding the culture, Germans are said to be very grumpy, probably, which is honestly, it seems to be true, or it's kind of slowly proving to be true. Because Germans are, whenever I hear news from friends or from family and I ask them like, well, what's the vibe in Germany? Like, how's everything at home? And they're just like, everyone's in a bad mood. Like, even Germans are realizing this by now, that everyone's in a bad mood. They're saying like, because apparently, I haven't been to Germany in 1.5 years either, but apparently prices rose and everyone's dissatisfied with politics and dissatisfied with whatever, dissatisfied with their lives. And I get it. But yeah, the Germans do seem to be pretty grumpy. And then at the moment, we're also having this huge nationalist wave going on in politics. Like, everyone's on about migration and how we should stop migration and how bad migrants are. And it honestly makes me sick to hear this every day. I don't know what's going on in Germany with the people, but yeah, apparently migrants are the problem. Yeah, so that is something I see very critical. And when I was traveling Turkey, I got a lot of insights into the German culture, which is what I found very interesting, because we had a lot of Turkish guest workers in the 60s, 70s, 80s in Germany. So the German state invited them to come to work, handed out visas, and they ended up staying for sure, built their families, and now we have very strong ties to Turkish culture within the German culture because of that. And when I was traveling Turkey, I was frequently approached by Turkish people seeing my German license plate or hearing me speak German. And they're like, kommst du aus Deutschland? So like they were speaking in German to me, saying that they've worked in Germany or they have relatives in Germany or whatever. And they got super friendly and super excited. They would invite me for food, tell me all about their experiences in Germany. And they had those like cheerful, loving eyes. And I was thinking, like, if a Turkish car with a Turkish license plate got into Germany, what would happen? And it definitely wouldn't be the same reaction. And that really made me wonder about why it's so hard for us to appreciate other cultures, other influences, other people. And the guest workers really have done a lot for our economy too. So it's been a two-sided thing, not just, in their interest, basically. Anyways, so a couple of rambling thoughts about German culture.
No, that's I appreciate you sharing your insights, and that's an interesting kind of perspective and way to think about it. Is just like, here's what I'm experiencing, like as a traveler in this place. What would they experience if it was like the situation was reversed? And kind of the insights around that. I think it's fascinating. Do you want to share where people can follow along in your journey, learn more about your stuff, get in touch if they have any questions, if they want to go take a van through the stands or some of these other places that you've been? Where should people find you?
Yeah, definitely. So I use Instagram pretty frequently. My username is Maria Lydia Erika, which is probably difficult to spell for any non-German person.
Yeah,
Perfect.
We'll put it in the show notes so everybody.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I also have a website with a little blog, which also has a German name. It's called daslebengehtvor.com. So and I am, or whoever wants to get in touch, both of these, like, I either answer on Instagram or via mail.
Yeah.
So
cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate, like, thanks for getting in touch and agreeing to do this. Cause I think, yeah, in the spirit of this community, it's just like, we always love to share these stories on a deeper level. And also like the fact that I got the sense that you were the type of person, like, yeah, people could just get in touch with if they had questions, and like really just kind of sharing with the pure intention of just kind of putting it out there. And you never know, maybe this is something people are planning, or they're getting new ideas, or just, getting empowered, hearing that somebody's out there, you're out there solo traveling in some of these places. I don't know. All these stories, I think they open up a lot of avenues and ideas for people. And so I think that that's, part of what we're trying to do here. And I think that you totally brought that today as a guest. So thank you for providing value to this community, providing value to me in this conversation. I'm feeling empowered and inspired and excited. I'm jotting down some notes. I'm like, the one I put down is like Turkey, van life, question mark. Like, maybe that's my next trip with my kids. I don't know, get the van.
I'm sure you'd love
that was your number one recommendation. So yeah, any like quote you're living by, or just kind of like, it's always nice to kind of sign off with, any perspective you want to share, any last words. This is your time to shine. No, too much pressure. No, but yeah.
Fair enough.
Travel advice, your best piece of travel advice, your best piece of travel gear, anything.
Oh God. Okay, I'll go with a motto. So there's a poem which is called, it's German. Sorry about that, but I bet there's a good English translation.
Don't be sorry. You're a professional translator. I'm sure you're going to nail it.
Fair enough. So I won't, I don't think I'll quote it itself, but I encourage everyone to look it up. It's called Stufen by Hermann Hesse, which is basically about not getting too comfortable in any place that you're in, because the world has so much to offer. And it basically encourages you to get out there.
Beautiful. Love it. If you can send me that in an email, we'll try to Google it and find it and then post it up in the show notes as well. So I have the spelling right when we're searching. Maria, such a pleasure. Thank you. And if the van rolls through anywhere through Norway where I live, please let me know. I would love to do this in person in the van for a part 2. Really appreciate your time, and good luck with the new gig, and hope you continue to enjoy and have a safe trip.
Thanks. You too.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.
There you have it. I want to thank our guest, Maria Glaser, for coming on the show, and we'll link up to everything mentioned in the show notes. Are you ready to go campervanning through the stands or campervanning somewhere? I think it's a great lesson, a great reminder, her story, how she took the small trips and built up to this bigger one. And I think, one way we could do that with this style of travel specifically, I've thought about doing this myself, is just renting a camper van or renting an RV and taking it for the weekend or just for a week somewhere and see how you like it. See if it's going to be something you fall in love with. It's going to be worth the expense and maintaining a vehicle, or if it's enough just to, do it as a rental situation every now and again, because we can live all these styles of travel and we don't have to own these things or invest in all of these things. We can just use the sharing economy. We can rent them ourselves. We can borrow them with friends. And I think it's fun to experiment with different styles of travel. So something I'm considering. And one takeaway I wanted to share before I leave you with this quote is just, again, that idea of solo travel. It's one of those things that can be intimidating, I know, but you just learn so much. You hear it time and again on this show. And, what really kickstarted my travels, my nomadic travels, and then ultimately just my life of travel was not just my work travels, but also my solo backpacking trip, my first solo backpacking trip through Europe. It was so transformative in so many ways. And, all the things that might put you off about it if you're somebody who hasn't done it or maybe wants to do it more extensively, you will get out there and tackle those things, whether it's, being uncomfortable going out for a meal by yourself, or, sometimes just spending a lot of time with yourself for fear of getting lonely, all those things. Again, going back to what I said at the top, a lot of those things are just normal fears that all of us would have when we're embarking on a solo trip. But then, all these people, as you hear on this show and other places through your conversations and perhaps through your own experience, you go and then, perhaps some of those fears are founded, but also you get over them and you tackle them and you end up having a totally unique, incredible experience through solo travel. So just a little call to action as we close this one out to get out there and solo travel if you haven't done it in a while. Always a joy. Okay. Leave you with a quote from Sun Tzu, who said, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.